My son left me alone on Christmas so he could take care of his sick father-in-law, but I saw them vacationing in Paris. I sent him one message, he instantly regretted it. I'll tell you everything. First, let me thank you for watching Granny's Voice. Please subscribe and tell us where you're watching from in the comments. We might give you a shout out in our next video. Today's special shout out goes to Jennifer Jones from New Jersey. Thank you for being part of our family. Now, let me tell you everything. Hello everyone, I'm Margaret Collins, a 72-year-old retired teacher from Ohio. After working 35 years in public schools, I saved every penny I could for retirement. When my son David got married to Rebecca 4 years ago, I thought about how I could help them start their new life together. Being a mother means you never stop caring, even when your child becomes an adult. When they struggle, you feel that pain deep in your heart. From their wedding day forward, I made it my mission to support them however I could. David and Rebecca live in Chicago, where everything costs twice as much as here in Ohio. Between their apartment rent, student loans, and daily expenses, they could barely make ends meet. So naturally I stepped in to help. When Rebecca got pregnant with little Emma, the costs only grew higher. Baby formula, cribs, clothes that she outgrows every 3 months. Without hesitation, I started sending them $3,000 every single month. It wasn't easy on my fixed income, but seeing Emma's sweet face in those photos they sent made every sacrifice worth it. Month after month, year after year, that bank transfer became as regular as my morning coffee. My elderly neighbor Mrs. Henderson would sometimes shake her head and say, "Margaret, you're being too generous. What if they start depending on you too much?" But I'd just wave her concerns away with a smile. Family takes care of family, I'd tell her. As long as they're happy and healthy, that's all that matters to me. Looking back now, maybe I was being foolish. Maybe I was just an old woman trying to buy her place in their busy lives. But at the time, I truly believed I was doing what any loving mother would do. Christmas was approaching, and the winter air filled me with excitement instead of dread for the first time in years. I had decided early that I would spend the holidays with David's family in Chicago. I couldn't wait to watch Emma open her presents and hear her little laugh echo through their apartment. 2 weeks before Christmas, I went shopping for the perfect gifts. For Emma, I found a beautiful pink dollhouse with tiny furniture that she could arrange however she wanted. For Rebecca, I picked out a silk blouse I'd seen her admiring in a magazine. And for David, I chose a leather wallet to replace the worn-out one he'd been using since college. I even baked 3 dozen of my famous sugar cookies and packed them carefully in festive tins. As I wrapped each gift with shiny paper and golden ribbons, I pictured our Christmas morning together. Emma running around in her pajamas, Rebecca making hot chocolate, David helping me set the table for our feast. The train tickets to Chicago were already tucked safely in my purse. I'd been planning this visit for months, dreaming of being surrounded by the people I loved most in this world. Their apartment had become like a second home to me over the years. When they first moved in, David had shown me around proudly, pointing out the second bedroom. "Mom," he'd said with that boyish grin I remembered from his childhood, "this room is yours whenever you want to visit. You're always welcome here." Rebecca had nodded enthusiastically, adding that they loved having me around because I helped with Emma and always brought such joy to their home. Those words had wrapped around my heart like a warm blanket. I treasured every visit, every laugh we shared, every quiet moment watching Emma play. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that sense of belonging could disappear so suddenly. 3 days before I was supposed to leave for Chicago, I was trying on a new red sweater I'd bought specifically for Christmas dinner. The phone rang, and David's name appeared on the screen. "Mom," his voice sounded different somehow. Distant and uncomfortable. "Hi sweetie, what's going on?" I could feel my stomach drop even before he started explaining. "Nothing's wrong exactly," he said carefully. "I just wanted to ask you something. Did you already buy your train ticket?" The question hit me like cold water. My heart started racing as I sensed something terrible coming. "Yes, everything's ready," I managed to say. "Why? What's happening?" There was a long pause, and then he said quietly, "Let me put Rebecca on the phone for a minute." Before I could respond, I heard the phone being passed over. Rebecca's voice came through, sweet but shaky. "Hi Margaret," she began hesitantly. "So we have a bit of a situation here. My father isn't doing well health-wise, and David and I decided we should spend Christmas at his house this year. He needs constant care right now, and we feel it's our duty as his family." The words felt like needles piercing my chest. "Where does that leave me?" I asked, though I was terrified to hear the answer. "Well," she continued, her voice getting smaller, "my father's house is very small, and with his medical equipment everywhere, there really isn't space for additional guests. We thought maybe you could celebrate at home this year, or perhaps visit your sister in Florida." I felt like someone had knocked all the air out of my lungs. This was the woman who called me her second mother just last year. The woman I'd helped through her difficult pregnancy. The woman whose baby I'd babysat countless times so she could rest. Now she was politely but firmly telling me I wasn't welcome. My hands were shaking as I gripped the phone tighter. "But it's Christmas," I whispered. "We always spend Christmas together." "I understand this is disappointing, Margaret," Rebecca replied, and I could hear David coaching her in the background. "But family comes first, and right now my father needs us. Surely you can understand that. Family comes first." Those words echoed in my head like a cruel joke. What about me? What about the family who had been sending $3,000 every month? What about the grandmother who'd been counting down the days until Christmas morning with her granddaughter? "I could sleep on the couch," I offered desperately, grasping for any way to salvage our Christmas plans. "Or even on the floor with some blankets. I don't need much space." There was another pause, and this time David took back the phone. His voice was firmer now, more decisive. "Mom, that wouldn't work," he said flatly. "Rebecca's father is very particular about his routines, and having extra people around would just stress him out more. Besides, we're going to be busy taking care of him around the clock. It wouldn't be much of a Christmas celebration anyway. You'd probably be more comfortable staying home." Comfortable staying home. Alone. On Christmas. While my son and his family played happy families somewhere else. The rejection stung worse than anything I'd ever experienced. Here I was, the woman who'd emptied her savings account to help them through tough times, being told I'd be more comfortable spending the holiday by myself. David continued talking, his voice taking on that fake caring tone people use when they're delivering bad news. "Maybe you could visit Aunt Linda," he suggested. "Didn't she invite you to her place last year? You could have a nice quiet Christmas there." Nice quiet Christmas. Translation: go bother someone else. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them hear me cry. "Fine," I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Understand. Take care of Rebecca's father. I'll figure something out." After I hung up, the silence in my house felt deafening. I walked over to my suitcase, already packed and waiting by the front door, and stared at all those carefully wrapped presents stacked beside it. The dollhouse for Emma, the blouse for Rebecca, the wallet for David. They looked so cheerful and bright, like they were mocking my stupidity. How could I have been so naive? All those years of support, all that money, all that love, and this is what I got in return. A polite dismissal and a suggestion to spend Christmas with relatives I barely see. I sank onto my couch and let the full weight of the situation crush down on me. David hadn't even sounded sorry. Rebecca had been polite but firm, like she was turning down a door-to-door salesman. Neither of them seemed to care that they were leaving their mother and grandmother completely alone during the most important holiday of the year. As I sat there in my empty living room, surrounded by Christmas decorations that now felt like decorations for a party that had been cancelled, one thought kept running through my mind. Something didn't add up about their story. Rebecca's father being sick and needing constant care. Last month, David had mentioned that his father-in-law was planning to take a cruise with his golf buddies after the new year. People who need constant medical care don't usually book cruise vacations. And Rebecca's father lived in a huge house in the suburbs, not some tiny space without room for guests. I'd been there myself for Emma's first birthday party. It had 4 bedrooms and a finished basement. Suddenly, all the inconsistencies started clicking together in my mind like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to solve. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. Not just hurt anymore, but furious. They weren't just excluding me from Christmas. They were lying to me about it. They thought I was some foolish old woman who would believe whatever story they fed me and quietly disappear. Well, maybe I had been foolish, but I wasn't blind. I needed to know the truth, even if it was going to hurt worse than their lies. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined them laughing about how easily they'd gotten rid of the meddling mother-in-law for the holidays. By morning I'd made up my mind. I was going to find out what they were really doing for Christmas. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Rebecca's sister, Michelle. We'd met a few times at family gatherings and had always gotten along well. I took a deep breath and dialed her number, trying to sound casual and friendly when she answered. "Hi Michelle, this is Margaret, David's mom," I said cheerfully. "I was just wondering about Christmas plans this year. Rebecca mentioned that your father isn't feeling well." Michelle's response made my blood run cold. "Oh, hi Margaret," she said brightly. "Actually, Dad's doing great lately. His arthritis has been much better since he started those new exercises. In fact, he's so excited about the family trip to Paris that he's been showing everyone his new camera equipment. He can't wait to take pictures of the Eiffel Tower." The phone slipped in my hand. I nearly dropped it. "Paris," I managed to croak out. Michelle kept chattering happily, completely unaware that she'd just shattered my world. "Yes, isn't it wonderful? David surprised everyone by booking this amazing Christmas trip to Paris for the whole family. They leave tomorrow morning. Dad's been learning French phrases all week." The room started spinning around me. Paris. They were going to Paris for Christmas. While I sat alone in Ohio, believing their lies about caring for a sick relative, my son had looked me in the eye, well, through the phone, and told me the most elaborate lie I'd ever heard. And I'd believed every word of it. I thanked Michelle and hung up as quickly as I could, then sat staring at the wall in complete shock. David had planned a family vacation to one of the most beautiful cities in the world. He'd included Rebecca's perfectly healthy father, but he'd lied to keep me away. The betrayal cut deeper than any pain I'd ever felt. This wasn't just about Christmas anymore. This was about respect, about honesty, about whether I meant anything to them beyond the monthly check I sent. I felt like such a fool. All those times I'd sent money when they said they were struggling, was any of it true? Or had I been funding their nice lifestyle while they saw me as nothing more than a convenient ATM? The woman who gave them $3,000 every month without question, but wasn't worth an honest conversation about Christmas plans. I was done with lies. I was done with being treated like a burden they had to manage. If David wanted to play games, then we were going to play by new rules. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. He answered on the third ring, sounding rushed and distracted. "Oh, hi Mom, what's up? We're actually pretty busy getting ready to take care of Rebecca's dad." His casual lie made my anger boil over. "Really, David?" I said, my voice deadly calm. "That's interesting because I just spoke to Michelle, and she told me something very different about your Christmas plans." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear his mind racing, trying to figure out how much I knew and what excuse he could come up with next. "David," I continued, my voice getting stronger with each word, "did you think I was too stupid to find out the truth? Did you really believe I just accept your lies and spend Christmas alone while you're sipping wine at sidewalk cafes in Paris?" "Mom, I can explain," he started, but I cut him off. "No," I said firmly. "I don't want to hear any more lies. I just want to know one thing. Why couldn't you just tell me the truth? Why did you have to make up this elaborate story about Rebecca's sick father?" Another pause, and then David's true feelings finally came out. "Because Mom," he said with obvious irritation, "we wanted a peaceful Christmas with just our immediate family. We didn't want to deal with all the stress of hosting anyone else. It would have been complicated having you there, and honestly we just wanted some space." Space. From the woman who'd been supporting them financially for years. From Emma's grandmother who loved her more than life itself. I was an inconvenience to them, a complication they wanted to avoid during their dream vacation to Paris. "So I'm not immediate family?" I asked, my voice cracking despite my efforts to stay strong. Of course you are, he said quickly, realizing how awful his words had sounded. But Mom, you have to understand, we're adults now. We need to make our own decisions about how we spend our holidays. We can't always include everyone in everything we do. Include everyone. I repeated in disbelief. David, I'm not everyone. I'm your mother. I'm Emma's grandmother. I'm the person who sends you $3,000 every month so you can afford your lifestyle in Chicago. That's when David really showed his true colors. Mom, he said coldly, nobody forced you to send us that money. That was your choice. If you were doing it expecting something in return, then maybe you were doing it for the wrong reasons. We never asked you to support us financially. You decided to do that on your own, so don't try to use it against us now. The cruelty of his words took my breath away. According to my own son, every sacrifice I'd made, every dollar I'd sent, every time I'd put their needs before my own comfort, had been meaningless because they hadn't specifically asked for it. As if love and support were only valid if they came with a written request. David wasn't finished destroying me yet. He continued with that self-righteous tone that made my skin crawl. Rebecca's father has worked hard his whole life and deserves to enjoy his retirement. We wanted to give him this special trip while he's still healthy enough to travel. It's called being thoughtful and caring about family, Mom. Maybe you should try understanding that sometimes it's not all about you. Not all about me. I had to bite my tongue to keep from screaming. The man who'd been living off my monthly contributions was lecturing me about being selfish. The same person who just lied to my face was telling me about the importance of being thoughtful and caring. I was shaking with rage, but somehow I managed to keep my voice level. You're absolutely right, David, I said quietly. It's not all about me. And you know what? From now on, it won't be about me at all. I could hear the confusion in his voice when he asked what I meant by that. I'm glad you reminded me that I chose to send you money without being asked, I continued. Well, now I'm choosing to stop. Effective immediately, there will be no more monthly transfers. You're adults, as you reminded me, so you can figure out how to support yourselves like other adults do. The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Then David's voice came back, panicked and angry. Mom, you can't just cut us off like that. We have expenses, we have commitments. You can't just change everything overnight because you're upset about Christmas. But I wasn't upset anymore. I was crystal clear for the first time in years. David, I said calmly, I'm not changing anything. I'm just accepting what you've been trying to tell me. We're not as close as I thought we were. You don't need me the way I thought you did. So now you won't have to worry about me being too involved in your life or expecting things in return for my support. You're free to be the independent family you wanted to be. I heard Rebecca's voice in the background, asking what was happening, and David trying to explain in hushed tones. Then he came back to the phone, his attitude completely changed. Mom, please be reasonable, he pleaded. We didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Maybe we can work something out about Christmas. Maybe there's room for one more person on the trip. One more person. Even his attempt at an apology reduced me to an afterthought. No thank you, David, I replied. I wouldn't want to complicate your peaceful family vacation. Besides, I'm sure you can afford to add another ticket with all the money you'll be saving now that you don't have to depend on your mother's generosity anymore. Have a wonderful time in Paris. Take lots of pictures. And with that I hung up. I turned off my phone and sat in the silence of my living room, surrounded by Christmas decorations and packed suitcases that would never make their intended journey. For the first time since this whole mess started, I felt something other than hurt and anger. Felt free. That night I made myself a proper dinner and ate it slowly, without rushing to answer phone calls or check messages. I watched an old movie I'd been meaning to see and went to bed at a reasonable hour. When I woke up the next morning, Christmas Eve, I felt lighter than I had in years. No frantic preparations, no worrying about traffic to the airport, no anxiety about whether my gifts would be appreciated. Just quiet, peaceful solitude. I made myself coffee and toast, sat by the window, and watched the snow beginning to fall outside. My phone, which I'd finally turned back on, showed 17 missed calls and dozens of text messages. I deleted them all without reading them. Whatever panic David and Rebecca were experiencing about their suddenly uncertain financial future was not my problem anymore. They were adults, as David had reminded me, and adults figure things out for themselves. I had learned something valuable about the difference between being needed and being used, and I wasn't going back to that one-sided relationship ever again. Christmas morning arrived quietly. I slept until 9, made pancakes for breakfast, and opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a special occasion. Turned out, rediscovering my self-respect was special enough. Around noon, my neighbor Mrs. Henderson knocked on my door with a plate of cookies and an invitation to join her family for dinner. Instead of making excuses or declining out of pride, I accepted gratefully. Sometimes the family that matters most is the one that chooses to include you, not the one that feels obligated to tolerate you. 3 days after Christmas, I was reading in my favorite chair when my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, but this time I felt nothing but mild curiosity about what he might want. His voice was strained and desperate when I answered. "Mom, we need to talk," he said without any greeting. "Things have gotten complicated since you stopped the transfers. Rebecca's father had to help us cover some bills, and he's not happy about it. The Paris trip has been tense because everyone knows about our financial problems now." I listened without comment as David explained how embarrassing it had been to ask Rebecca's family for money, how they'd had to cut their vacation short, how Rebecca was crying because she felt like they'd ruined Christmas for everyone. When he finished his tale of woe, he waited for me to respond with sympathy and offers to help. Instead, I said simply, "That sounds very stressful for you, David. I'm sure you'll figure out a solution." "But Mom," he said, his voice rising with desperation, "we really need your help. We can't manage all our expenses without your support." I took a deep breath and gave him the answer I should have given years ago. "David," I said calmly, "I love you and I love Emma, but I'm not going to rescue you from the consequences of your choices anymore. You wanted independence, and now you have it. You wanted space from me, and now you have that too. I'm not your emergency fund or your backup plan. I'm your mother, and I deserve better treatment than I've been getting." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, with David alternating between anger and pleading, but I held firm. When he finally realized that tears and tantrums weren't going to work, his true feelings came out again. "Fine," he said bitterly. "If this is how you want to be, then don't expect to see Emma anymore. You're choosing money over family, and I won't let my daughter be around someone so petty and vindictive." The threat was meant to devastate me, to bring me to my knees begging for forgiveness. Instead, it confirmed everything I'd suspected about David's character. "That's your choice to make, David," I replied sadly. "But someday Emma will be old enough to make her own decisions about who she wants in her life. I hope by then you'll have learned the difference between love and manipulation." After I hung up, I felt a profound sense of closure. The son I'd raised, the one who used to bring me dandelions and tell me I was the best mom in the world, had shown me exactly who he'd become. And that person wasn't someone I needed to chase or beg for affection from. 6 months passed peacefully. I started volunteering at the local library, reading to children during story hour. I joined a book club with other women my age who had interesting lives and opinions. I traveled to visit my sister in Florida, not because I'd been excluded from somewhere else, but because I wanted to see her. My life became fuller and richer without the constant stress of worrying about David's problems or walking on eggshells to avoid his disapproval. The $3,000 I used to send them every month went into a savings account for my own future needs. Then one evening in late June, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Rebecca stood there with Emma, both of them looking tired and defeated. "Margaret," Rebecca said, her voice shaking, "we need to talk." I invited them in and made tea while Emma played quietly with some books I kept for young visitors. Rebecca's story came pouring out in broken sentences and tears. David had lost his job 2 months ago and had been lying about it, pretending to go to work every day. Their savings were gone, they were 3 months behind on rent, and Rebecca's father had cut them off after learning about David's deception. "I know we don't deserve your help," Rebecca whispered, but I didn't know where else to turn. "David's pride won't let him ask you himself, But we're going to lose our apartment next week if we can't come up with the money. Emma needs a stable home, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to provide that for her. I looked at this young woman who had participated in excluding me from Christmas, who had helped craft the lies that cut me so deeply. But I also saw a mother who was scared for her child's future, someone who had swallowed her pride to ask for help from a person she had wronged. "Rebecca," I said gently, "where is David in all this?" She looked down at her hands. "He's too ashamed to face you," she admitted. "He knows he was wrong about Christmas, about the way he spoke to you. But he's also angry that you didn't just forgive him and go back to how things were before. He doesn't understand why everything has to be so complicated now." I felt a deep sadness, not for David's financial troubles, but for the man he'd chosen to become. Someone who could hurt people and then be angry when they didn't immediately forget about it. "I can't just give you money and pretend nothing happened," I told Rebecca honestly. "Too much damage has been done for us to go back to the old way of doing things. But Emma is innocent in all this, and I won't let my granddaughter suffer because her parents made poor choices." I offered Rebecca something different than the blank checks David had grown accustomed to. I would pay for Emma's daycare directly, and I would help with groceries by buying them myself and delivering them weekly. But there would be no cash transfers, no money that could be spent on non-essentials, and David would need to find work within 30 days or find somewhere else to live. Rebecca agreed to everything immediately, crying with relief and gratitude. She promised that things would be different, that they had learned their lesson about taking family for granted. I wanted to believe her, but I'd heard similar promises before. This time I would let actions speak louder than words. Over the following weeks, I kept my word about supporting Emma while maintaining boundaries with David and Rebecca. I saw my granddaughter regularly, took her on outings and helped with her needs. But I also made it clear that my home was my sanctuary, and I wouldn't be manipulated by guilt or emergencies anymore. David eventually found a new job, though it paid less than his previous one. The family moved to a smaller apartment, and their lifestyle became much more modest. Most importantly, they learned to live within their means instead of depending on someone else to cover the difference. David and I maintained a polite but distant relationship. He never apologized for Christmas or for the cruel things he'd said, but he also never again asked me for money or tried to exclude me from family events. We found a new equilibrium, one based on mutual respect rather than one-sided obligation. 2 years later, as I was decorating my Christmas tree, I reflected on how much had changed since that awful December when I'd learned about their trip to Paris. I was no longer the desperate mother willing to accept any treatment in order to maintain a relationship with my son. I had learned to value myself, to set boundaries, and to build a life that didn't revolve around other people's needs and moods. The Christmas tree looked beautiful, decorated with ornaments I'd collected over the years and new ones I'd bought just because they made me smile. Emma was coming over the next day to help me bake cookies, a tradition we'd established that belonged just to us. Rebecca would drop her off and pick her up, polite but not presuming to stay unless invited. The balance felt right, healthy, sustainable. I learned that love doesn't mean allowing people to treat you poorly. It doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity to maintain relationships that drain your spirit. Real family, the kind worth having, doesn't require you to earn your place through constant giving or to accept lies and exclusion with grateful silence. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step back and let people experience the consequences of their choices. That Christmas Eve, as snow fell softly outside my window and carols played quietly on the radio, I felt truly content for the first time in years. My house was peaceful, my conscience was clear, and my future was my own to shape. I had stopped being someone else's ATM and started being myself again. The woman who had raised a son, built a career, and deserved respect in her golden years. Sometimes people ask me if I regret cutting off the financial support or if I wish I'd handled things differently. The answer is always no. I regret that it took me so long to recognize that I was being used rather than loved. I regret that I enabled behavior that ultimately made my son a weaker, more entitled person. But I don't regret standing up for myself when it finally became clear that nobody else was going to do it. David is still my son and I still love him. But I love him from a healthy distance now, without enabling his poor choices or accepting disrespectful treatment. Emma is growing up knowing that her grandmother is someone who values herself, someone who won't be taken advantage of. I hope that lesson serves her well as she navigates her own relationships someday. As for Rebecca, she seems to have learned something from our ordeal. She's more independent now, more appreciative of help when it comes, and more honest in her communications with me. We'll never be as close as we once were, but we have a functional relationship built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. The most important lesson I learned is that you teach people how to treat you. For too long, I had taught my son that he could lie to me, exclude me, and take my money without consequences. When I finally changed that dynamic, he had a choice: treat me better or lose access to my support. He chose better treatment, even if it came reluctantly. I think about that Christmas in Paris sometimes, the one they took without me. I imagine them walking along the Seine, visiting museums, taking photos in front of famous landmarks. And you know what? I hope they had a wonderful time. Because that trip cost them something much more valuable than the price of an airline ticket. It cost them their integrity and my unconditional support. Now, when Christmas approaches each year, I make plans that bring me joy rather than stress. Sometimes I travel to visit friends, sometimes I volunteer at community events, and sometimes I simply enjoy the peace of my own home. Emma comes to visit, we make cookies and hot chocolate, and we create our own traditions that aren't dependent on anyone else's approval or accommodation. I decorated my mantel with photos of Emma and a few precious memories of David from when he was young and kind. I kept the good memories but released the obligation to pretend that our relationship hadn't fundamentally changed. Some relationships survive crisis and become stronger. Others reveal their true nature under pressure and must be rebuilt from scratch or abandoned entirely. The hardest part of this whole experience wasn't losing the money I'd been sending them. It was accepting that my son had become someone I didn't recognize. The little boy who used to hug my legs and tell me he loved me had grown into a man capable of elaborate deception and casual cruelty. That realization broke my heart in a way that no financial loss ever could. But heartbreak, I discovered, doesn't have to be permanent. Hearts can heal, especially when you stop picking at the wounds by repeatedly exposing yourself to more hurt. I grieved for the relationship David and I used to have, accepted that it was gone, and began building something new based on who we actually are rather than who I wished we could be. The woman I am today is stronger, wiser, and more selective about how I spend my time and energy. I'm not bitter or angry anymore. Those emotions required too much energy and gave me nothing positive in return. Instead, I'm grateful for the clarity that came from such a painful experience. I learned who I could count on and, more importantly, who I couldn't. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor, told me something wise during that first difficult Christmas. She said that sometimes God removes people from our lives not as punishment, but as protection. Protecting us from pouring ourselves into relationships that will never give back, from sacrificing our peace for people who don't value it, from mistaking obligation for love. Looking back now, I can see that David's betrayal was actually a gift wrapped in painful paper. It forced me to examine patterns I'd been blind to for years. The constant giving without receiving, the walking on eggshells to avoid conflict, the automatic assumption that I was responsible for everyone else's happiness while no one worried about mine. Breaking free from those patterns was like learning to breathe again after holding my breath for decades. I started saying no to requests that felt unreasonable. I stopped making excuses for other people's bad behavior. I began investing in friendships with people who actually enjoyed my company rather than just tolerated it in exchange for favors. My social circle became smaller but infinitely more genuine, filled with people who called because they wanted to hear my voice, not because they needed something from me. The financial freedom that came from not supporting David's family allowed me to pursue interests I'd neglected for years. I took art classes, joined a hiking group, and even learned to play the piano. Something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for when I was constantly worried about everyone else's needs. My retirement years became about personal growth and joy rather than anxious caregiving. Emma, now older and more perceptive, began asking questions about why things changed between her father and me. I answered honestly but age-appropriately. explaining that sometimes adults make mistakes that hurt relationships, and that it's important to treat family members with kindness and respect. I never spoke badly about David, but I didn't pretend that everything was perfect either. One day, Emma asked me why I didn't live with them like her friend's grandmother did. I explained that I loved having my own space and independence, that being a grandmother didn't mean I had to give up my own life and dreams. She seemed to understand and even said she thought it was cool that her grandma had her own apartment and hobbies. Children, I realized, are often more adaptable than adults when it comes to accepting new family dynamics. The holidays became peaceful again once I stopped trying to force gatherings that no one really wanted. Emma and I developed our own Christmas tradition of decorating gingerbread houses and watching classic movies together. Rebecca would drop her off in the morning and pick her up after dinner, giving me a full day with my granddaughter without the tension of trying to pretend everything was normal with David. 3 years after the Paris incident, David called me with unexpected news. He'd been promoted to a management position at his company and wanted to take me out to dinner to celebrate. I agreed, curious about this olive branch but not expecting too much from it. At dinner, he was more mature than I'd seen him in years, talking about his work responsibilities and Emma's progress in school without asking for anything from me. As we were finishing dessert, David finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I messed up that Christmas. I know I lied to you and treated you terribly. I was so focused on what I wanted that I didn't think about how it would hurt you. I don't expect you to forget it or go back to the way things were, but I wanted you to know that I understand now why you had to protect yourself from me." It wasn't a perfect apology. He didn't take full responsibility for his actions, and he still seemed to think my response had been primarily about the money rather than the betrayal. But it was progress, and I accepted it as such. I told him I appreciated his acknowledgement and that I hoped we could continue building a better relationship based on honesty and mutual respect. We weren't going back to our old dynamic, but maybe we could find a new one that worked for both of us. The years that followed brought gradual healing. David and I developed a cordial relationship where we saw each other at Emma's school events and birthday parties, exchanged holiday cards, and occasionally had lunch together. It wasn't the close mother-son bond I'd once imagined we'd always have, but it was honest and sustainable. We both knew where we stood with each other, and there were no hidden expectations or resentments simmering beneath the surface. Rebecca and I found an even better balance. She seemed genuinely grateful for my continued involvement in Emma's life and never presumed upon our relationship or asked for more than I was willing to give. She'd grown up a lot during their financial crisis and had learned to appreciate help without taking it for granted. Our conversations became more natural and less guarded over time. Emma blossomed into a confident, thoughtful child who seemed to benefit from having a grandmother who modeled self-respect and independence. She learned that love doesn't mean always saying yes, that boundaries are healthy, and that people should be valued for who they are rather than what they can provide. I hoped these lessons would serve her well in her own relationships as she grew older. When I turned 75, Emma insisted on throwing me a birthday party. She invited my friends from book club, my neighbors, and a few relatives, including David and Rebecca. It was a small gathering but filled with people who genuinely cared about me, and I felt surrounded by love rather than obligation. David gave a short speech thanking me for being a good mother and grandmother, and while it felt a bit formal, I appreciated the public acknowledgement. As I blew out the candles on my cake, I made a wish for continued peace and happiness in my remaining years. I'd learned that joy doesn't come from sacrificing yourself for others or from being needed by people who don't appreciate you. It comes from living authentically, setting healthy boundaries, and surrounding yourself with people who value your presence rather than your presence. The story of that Christmas betrayal and its aftermath became, unexpectedly, one of the most valuable experiences of my life. It taught me that it's never too late to change destructive patterns, that self-respect is more important than keeping peace at any cost, and that real love can survive honest conversations about hurt and disappointment. The relationships that couldn't survive my newfound boundaries weren't worth preserving anyway. I often think about other women my age who might be in similar situations, giving endlessly to adult children who take their generosity for granted, accepting poor treatment because they're afraid of being alone, believing that love means never saying no. My story isn't unique, but my response to it was. I chose self-preservation over self-sacrifice. And that choice saved not just my bank account but my soul. If I could go back and change anything, it wouldn't be David's behavior. That was his choice to make. It would be my own response earlier in the process. I wish I'd set boundaries sooner, before resentment built up and the inevitable confrontation became so painful. I wish I'd valued myself enough to demand respectful treatment from the beginning, rather than accepting whatever crumbs of affection were thrown my way. But perhaps everything happened exactly as it needed to. Maybe I wasn't ready to change until the pain of staying the same became greater than the fear of standing up for myself. Maybe David needed to experience real consequences for his actions in order to grow into a more responsible person. Maybe our relationship needed to break down completely before it could be rebuilt on a healthier foundation. Today, as I sit in my comfortable living room with Emma playing at my feet and a good book waiting on the side table, I feel profound gratitude for the journey that brought me here. Not gratitude for the pain, I could have done without that, but gratitude for the strength I discovered I had, for the friends who stood by me, for the peace I found when I stopped trying to control other people's choices and started focusing on my own. The Christmas they left me for Paris was the worst holiday of my life at the time. But it led to many Christmases since then that have been filled with genuine joy, meaningful connections, and the deep satisfaction that comes from living according to your values rather than other people's expectations. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. You just can't see it until years later. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're the one always giving, always accommodating, always making excuses for people who don't treat you well, I want you to know that it's never too late to change the dynamic. You deserve respect, honesty, and genuine affection. You don't have to earn love through constant sacrifice, and you don't have to accept lies and manipulation to maintain relationships. Setting boundaries isn't cruel or selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships and personal well-being. The people who truly care about you will respect your limits and work to treat you better. The ones who fight against your boundaries or try to make you feel guilty for having them are showing you exactly why those boundaries are needed in the first place. My final Christmas wish, as I share this story with you, is that anyone who needs to hear this message will find the courage to value themselves enough to demand better treatment. Life is too short and too precious to spend it walking on eggshells around people who should be grateful for your presence in their lives. You deserve joy, peace, and relationships that add to your life rather than drain it. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there realize that they're not alone, that change is possible, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to love yourself enough to say no to treatment that diminishes your worth. Christmas should be about love, joy, and togetherness, but those things should never come at the cost of your dignity or self-respect. From my home to yours, I wish you peaceful holidays filled with people who cherish you for who you are, not what you can do for them. And remember, you're never too old to start over, never too set in your ways to change destructive patterns, and never too obligated to others to choose your own happiness. Take care of yourselves, and thank you for being part of my extended family here on Granny's Voice. As I close this chapter of my story, I want to leave you with the most important lesson I learned through this painful but transformative experience. Love isn't measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice or how much disrespect you're willing to tolerate. Real love is mutual, respectful, and honest. It doesn't require you to diminish yourself to make others comfortable, and it doesn't ask you to accept lies in place of truth. The relationship between David and me will never be what I once dreamed it would be, but it's authentic now in a way it never was before. We know exactly where we stand with each other. There are no false expectations, no hidden resentments, no financial dependencies clouding our interactions. Emma gets to see what healthy boundaries look like, and hopefully, she'll carry those lessons into her own adult relationships. As for me, I wake up each day knowing that I'm living my own life rather than existing as an extension of someone else's. I make choices based on what brings me joy and fulfillment rather than what others expect from me. I've learned that growing older doesn't mean becoming invisible or irrelevant. It means becoming more selective about how you spend your precious time and energy. The woman who once packed suitcases for a Christmas visit that would never happen has evolved into someone who packs suitcases for adventures of her own choosing. The mother who once measured her worth by how much her children needed her has discovered worth that exists independent of anyone else's requirements or approval. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the permission to stop being everything to everyone and start being ourselves. That Christmas in Paris that I wasn't invited to became the Christmas that changed everything. Not because it was the worst thing that happened to me, but because it was the thing that finally woke me up to my own value. And that, my dear friends, is worth more than any vacation, any monthly payment, or any relationship built on unequal terms. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, it's never too late to choose yourself.